Hello, this is my recording, and my first thesis is that historically most of the major wars that the United States participated in saw us entering them due to acts of foreign aggression against us. So, my subclaim for my first thesis is that in the early 20th century, the United States would find itself engulfed in both world wars due to foreign aggression. My historical evidence, my first piece of it, is that on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Empire surprise attacked the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The US would declare war on Japan in response, and this would have us end up in World War II. This was a defensive declaration of war in response to a surprise attack on us. So my second piece of historical evidence for this subclaim is that the United States entered World War I due to repeated German aggressions and from atrocities committed in Belgium in 1914 to unrestricted submarine warfare, and the final straw was the Zimmermann telegram sent in 1917. The United States would declare war on Germany and the rest of the Central Powers in response to these further aggressions. My document evidence is the U.S. at War by the Evening Times Extra, which was published a day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. You can see there in the bottom right, the headline is that Japan bombs Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, and Hickam Field. Casualties and damage heavy. So my first cartoon, my first cartoon that I drew to support my first thesis, I call this one A Big Catch, and in the first frame you could see a German U-boat sinking an American convoy ship headed to presumably Great Britain. And the German captain says another one right next to a really beautiful flag, and then it turns out he woke up the giant, the arsenal of democracy, and it's liberating time for him. And then my second cartoon that I drew to support the subclaim, I like to call this one Backstab, and you can see there on the top right the European major powers warring with each other, and the American public, represented as America Ball on the bottom left, is quite glad he's not involved in the conflict, but as you can see right next to him, the Japanese Empire is about to stab him in the back with a knife that represents Pearl Harbor. So my second thesis is that war has positively impacted the United States, as we have made a network of defensive alliances, which are usually positive, and secured our place as a world power through war. So my second subclaim is that post-World War II, the United States would become the democratic superpower and would use this position to protect global democracies from foreign, usually communist aggression, and would ultimately become the sole superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union. My first piece of historical evidence is that during the Korean War, the United States led a UN task force in defending South Korea, which was an authoritarian democratic nation, from North Korea, which was a totalitarian communist nation. So, my second piece of historical evidence is that in the Vietnam War, the U.S. would end up sending over 600,000 men into South Vietnam, which was a democracy, to defend the nation against the rebel Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, also known as the NVA. My document evidence is from thevietnamwarinfo.com on an article titled Vietnam War Was It Justified? And the U.S. would have been supporting South Vietnam to defend its independence since 1954. And this is quoting President Johnson. And in his words, to leave South Vietnam to its fate would undervalue America's words and commitment and ultimately shake its credibility in the world. The U.S. therefore was obligated to keep a promise of helping South Vietnamese people in their war against the North Communists. They fought hard for a noble cause. So the United States had already promised South Vietnamese support since 1954, and if they had backed down during the Vietnam War, then it would have been seen as a victory for the communists, and that was a no-no. So this piece is titled The Cold War, and you can see America shielding its allies with the NATO shield against the communist aggression represented by the gun, and then you can see the various countries that they have on each side. Notice South Vietnam isn't completely behind the shield. And then my second cartoon that I made is about the collapse of the Soviet Union, and this is titled Collapse. So this is the best nations of December 1991. The United States is feeling pretty strong, pretty good about itself, whereas the Soviet Union is not feeling too well. I think it's got collapsitis. I think it's about to collapse within like maybe 2 weeks, and then Poland's just happy to not be communist anymore. And that is the end.